Hello and welcome to Upfront. I'm Kang Tae. This week we're going to go in-depth and upfront on the oligopoly-dominated film industry here in Korea. And to help us go upfront on this discussion, film director Mr. So Jae-young, thanks for coming in today.
It's nice to be here.
And Professor Park Kyung-shin from Korea University, thanks for coming in today as well. And film critic Mr. Darcy Paquette, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, so just to let you and our viewers in on why we chose this topic, the 19th Busan International Film Festival has kicked off here in Korea. And I did some research, films from 79 countries, over 300 specially invited films, over 100 premieres, so that's quite a large number. But the question is, we don't really get to see these award-winning films or new films in theaters. So that's the question that I'm going to just throw it out to the floor, is why don't we get to see these films in theaters?
Well, I think that the problem originates from the ownership of theaters. Mm-hmm. In the United States, the top 10 theater chains, their aggregate screens add up to only 60% of all screens in the United States. In Korea, only top 2 theater chains own 70% of screens in Korea. So for 70% of screens in Korea, there are just 2 people or 2 groups of people making a decision as to which screens show which movies. And their decisions tend to favor the films that have proven proven stars, and not many films, the type of films that you talk about, that will be award-winning at festivals. If they don't have stars, they don't have so much potential for these few decision makers on the screens.
So you're rather saying that it's a duopoly rather than oligopoly that I used, and you actually have a first-hand experience with this issue. Do tell us more.
Well, I'm a filmmaker, and I actually I teach professionally, so I actually teach at the Seoul Institute of the Arts, and I teach filmmaking. So in 2012, I made an indie movie, a feature film, and didn't really have a famous star in it and things like that. So I finished it, and it got into a lot of film festivals, and it ended up winning the New York Festival's World's Best TV and Film Award for Best Feature in 2013. So I had a very good product, and then I was lucky enough for it to be sold in the US. So a company in the US called Funimation actually decided to distribute it in the US. So I got an incredible opportunity to have a film that was done independently for a low budget that got sold to the US, and then when we released it theatrically, I got to release it both in Korea and America simultaneously. So I have this kind of product, and I thought, well, maybe I can have a lot of Korean people see it. But the irony was that you know, even the conglomerates like CJ has a division called Movie Collage, which they show a lot of indie and art movies. And my film actually made it to the Movie Collage system. So I got 5 CGV theaters that showed my movie. So, you know, I was really excited at the time last year to be showing it. But I ended up getting a total of 10 theaters that showed my works. And the box office results were pretty dismal. I had 1,000 people see it. So, and when I went to these CGV theaters, I was so happy because you know, finally my movie got to make it. But the times they gave me were things like 8 in the morning, or 2 in the morning, things like that. So I couldn't even ask my friends and family to come see the movie. So I kind of felt, wow, I'm in the system, but the system doesn't really accommodate you know, smaller movies that might not be considered mainstream.
Okay, so do you also agree that, you know, the film industry in Korea is majorly run by large conglomerates, or the 2 that we shall not particularly name? Do you agree?
Well, yeah, I think that if you look at it from the perspective of, you know, distributors, I mean, there are a lot of interesting films that are screening at the Busan Film Festival.
Sure.
And I think that if we had an environment where you had a lot of small companies that were going out and buying interesting films, and then they had the opportunity to release these films in theaters and to reach an audience, then it would be possible to get a very large number of films being released in theaters. But the fact is that if you're a small distributor, it's difficult to get your film released because you need to book your film into theaters. And obviously there's a certain degree of competition with this, and even in a perfect system there will be competition, so that some films will reach a wider audience than others. But when you only have a couple companies controlling a lot of screens and having a lot of the power in the film industry, then it becomes much more difficult for this.
Korean films from a wide array of genres gained popularity in the first half of this year. But the one thing they all have in common is that they were produced and distributed by major companies. Major companies usually invest in films that require budgets in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Another concern is about the current structure of the Korean film industry, in which major companies are only supplying films to theaters that are also run by major companies. The structure of the Korean film industry can be seen more clearly in the figures. Korea's 3 major companies were ranked 1, 2, and 3 in market share, even when including overseas distribution companies. They are CJ E&M, Lotte Entertainment, and Showbox from the Arirang Group. These 3 major companies control over 90% of the screens in Korean theaters. They compete with each other for more screens in order to create more profits in a short period of time. Small and medium-sized companies have spoken out against the current structure of the film industry that is dominated by major companies. The government has even expressed concerns over the issue.
And just to give you an example, for example, we have a major hit earlier this year in Korea, Roaring Currents. I think it really made history in this industry. CJ Entertainment invests money. CJ E&M is in charge of distribution, and CJ CGV is running the theaters and the multiplex business, so that we get this idea how things are done in Korea. But it's only limited to the film industry, other than other part of the arts and entertainment industry. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's money that's drawing these large conglomerates?
Well, I mean, certainly the film industry is a big money industry, and it attracted the attention of these, large conglomerates who were interested in, coming into the film industry. It's interesting that, I mean, the first Korean conglomerate that decided to make films was Samsung back in the 90s, because they were producing VCRs, and they wanted to ensure that they had contents so that people would buy more VCRs. But once the big companies came into the film industry, I think that, I mean, the amount of power that they had allowed them to grow bigger and bigger. And, I don't know, I mean, these film markets are very fragile in some ways. To keep balance within these markets is difficult in all countries. And I wouldn't say it's the case that, Korea is the only country that's dealing with these issues. I mean, certainly there are other countries that have, just as a difficult time ensuring competitive balance or greater challenges. But I mean, certainly there's a lot more that we could do, I think, to improve the situation for a wider diversity of films.
Sure.
And if you compare to concerts and plays, you cannot run, I mean, yes, you can produce a play, but you cannot run that play in 10,000 theaters all at the same time. But film, once you make a film, you can duplicate the prints and then show them in 10,000 theaters. So as a large conglomerate, it makes sense to invest a lot of money into one film and make a film that just kills the market, that kills the competitors, and then distribute that in a large number across you know, a large number of theaters. Same thing with the concerts. You know, you can write a good music, but you cannot have an orchestra playing in 10,000, right? So I think a film has that attraction, that the marginal cost of production, marginal cost of producing one more audience or one more showing is almost zero. So the money guys, they feel free in investing a lot of money into each film.
And I think there's this so-called wide release system where a film really enjoys the initial stage of this popularity momentum. Is that how it works really in the film industry?
Well, imagine yourself as a conglomerate. If you had invested all this money and then your company actually produced the movie, you know, made it, and now you want your money back on what you invested. So what you want to do is try to release it widely as possible. And if you have the means to do that, of course you're going to do it. And you know, this is a system that harks back to 1940, Hollywood. Hollywood had the same system. When it started in the 20s, it was just a couple of rich people that started studios, and the studios did everything what these other conglomerates in Korea are doing, until it just got to the point where I think in the U.S. it was basically at that point World War II was over, and all these people started coming back, and then theaters were everywhere, and the business was really booming, and U.S. was going through antitrust issues, and they took on the film industry and basically stopped the studios from being able to distribute it directly. So I could see it from the conglomerate's point of view why they would. It's called block booking, where you would book one movie in so many theaters, like 50% of what you own. And usually those things are to recoup on your investment and try to make as much money. And
you can't blame them.
Yes, but like any oligarch or monopoly, the problem is that you will stifle competition, because your product will always go out. It will be the only product. You control the supply. So even though they claim, we usually give you a very a high-end movie, very high-budget movie, but at the same time we'll do quality movies on the side along with this. But they're controlling that flow. So in essence, if you have much more competition, I think you're able to bring in a lot more interesting content, diverse content that would be competing with each other, and that just is not happening.
I mean, we cannot. One reason we cannot blame them is because we are in a market economy. But one reason that we need to blame them is because we want a fair market. We want the decision makers to give fair chances of success to a wide variety of films. Professor Saw is not crying out loud here, but from a perspective of a person who put so much time and effort into this film, the fact that only a very small number of people have a chance to see it is really disheartening. It's very discouraging. It really breaks the producer's heart, the director's heart, because if a large number of people see it, there is a chance that they'll talk to their friends, and then more people will start seeing, and then the theaters will take notice, and they may increase the number of screens showing his film. But he never got a fair chance of testing the audience. If you ask the theater chains, they'll say, "Oh, because Dr. Saw's film was too artsy." I don't know. I didn't see the film. And was not for a broad audience, but who knows, right? When Matrix came out, it was the first movie that used the Asian martial arts for sci-fi. Who knew it would be a success, right?
Actually, it's a very entertaining film. I saw his film.
Okay, good.
It's not this really difficult art house film.
Right. So we want the theaters to make a fair decision.
We've seen that film production, distribution, and screenings are all controlled by major companies.
then how effective is increasing the number of screens in making box office hits? The film shown on the most number of screens in the Korean film market was Transformers: Age of Extinction, which was released in June. The film dominated domestic screens from the first day of its release and raised questions about the oligopoly of screens. But in the end, it ranked 23rd in ticket sales in the history of the Korean film market. The film that was shown on the second highest number of screens was Myeongnam, or Roaring Currents, which sold 17.6 million tickets, a new box office record. But Transformers was only shown on 16 more screens than Roaring Currents. Both films, which were shown on a high number of screens, were distributed by major company CJ E&M. Nine Korean films and 11 Hollywood films among 100 box office hits have dominated over 1,000 domestic screens. But some of the films have different market shares in the overseas film market. Iron Man 3, which was released last year, finished 10th in ticket sales and was shown on nearly 1,400 screens, which is the 4th highest total ever for Korea. The 56% screen share within Korea was more than double the total in the United States.
So what do? We have this issue. Do we want more legal measures to come in and change the status quo?
It's an interesting question. I think that there are people who argue that we need more regulation. There are other people that perhaps would argue that we should focus more of our effort on support to other, like smaller films or international films. And then there are other ways that we could perhaps use the tax system to make things a bit more balanced than they are right now. Yeah, I'm curious about your...
I think that antitrust law, I mean, every market country has antitrust law, which aims to regulate, to give more freedom to a larger number of businesses. So freedom requires regulation. If you need to regulate the powers of the monopoly or duopoly to make sure that a large number of business people have freedom. And I think that should be applied to the film industry as well. It has not been so. So in Hollywood back in 1940s, the US Supreme Court decided that, hey, we should come in and make a structural change. After Paramount decision, the number of independent producers increased from 70 to 170 in 10 years. There was a 3 times increase. And the number of films distributed and invested by independents, before the Paramount decision, the majors invested and distributed about 78%. But after the Paramount decision, half of that were distributed and invested by the independents. So there was more diversity, of course, because of the external factors like booming television. The film industry as a whole took a hit. But the Paramount decision, definitely had its positive impact.
But that's in the 40s. That's pretty old. Do you think it's still applicable to the film industry in Korea today?
I don't think so, because what ended up doing, what happened after the antitrust law was regulated was the studios had to sell their theater chains to another company, so they were completely hands off on that. If I could imagine the 2 big conglomerates in Korea selling off all their stuff, and one of them even does a department store, so it's physically located, the theater is located in their property, I think it would be really difficult.
A little bit difficult, but
not impossible.
Not impossible, and if the law requires.
Yeah, I think at the time there was a lot of resistance on the part of the studios as well. And they were arguing, like, you can't make us sell our theaters because our whole economic model is going to collapse. And so they were horrified at this Paramount decision. But
and it did collapse. I mean, the number of new movies produced went down, the ticket prices went up for the consumers, so
I wouldn't blame it just on the distribution system. I mean, at that point, in 1948, TV wasn't as big as it is now. So when television came in, people stopped watching movies. Just like today, I would say the internet and games are pretty much destroying what we used to have as film audiences. So I think new entertainment formats and mediums are coming into play. I want to go back to the audience a little bit because I think one of the things, because I'm a filmmaker and a producer of works, to me, my biggest concern is trying to reach my audience, to have people see my movies. And I think this kind of monopoly system, the drawbacks, one of the drawbacks is that, you don't get the diversity of content. Now, the great thing about Busan Film Festival and a lot of really big festivals is that you do get to see movies by filmmakers, and it's very, sad that you only get to see it at the festival. And those things are there for that reason. But at the same time, I think the audience is shortchanged because they just don't get the diversity of content. If they wanted to see, a documentary, for example, it's really difficult to see that in a normal theater setting. But I also agree with Darcy a little bit. I think we could really clamp down on the two conglomerates and regulate them. But what I fear is that because if they decide to pull out of the industry or they make changes that'll actually jeopardize the whole money scheme of making movies, I think there are ways to do it. Like I think the taxation system could really work. I think we need to sort of, if the taxes are put into place, like if they start booking one movie in a theater, you have to start paying higher taxes, and then that tax money is funneled to more diverse films, like independent movies. So there are funds that, for example, the Korean Film Commission gives out money every year to filmmakers to make movies that are not mainstream. For example, if you could sort of implement plans like that, there's ways to, I think, combine regulation, partial regulation with taxation and incentive programs. I'm sort of in the situation where, I know a lot of these people too, and they're frustrated artists themselves. I mean, they're not just businessmen, because if you wanted to make money, I think the movie industry is actually the wrong industry to be in. It's hard to say, I'm going to make the $1 billion movie with this product, and a lot of times you fail. It's a real hit and miss thing. So those people also have passion. That's why they're in this industry. So I think, and what's great about the Korean film industry is that we have our own industry that people come to seek our own content, which isn't the case in a lot of other countries. Everybody goes to see Hollywood movies or Korean movies, nowadays, or Korean content. But so we have that power. How do we sort of distribute it more so that a lot of people are able to, take part in it? Is I think the way we should approach the solution.
All right. So it's clear to me that all three of you seem to agree on the need to talk about it at least, and to do something and change the status quo and this oligopoly or duopoly dominated film industry in Korea. Now, let's take a look at this short video clip and hear from the other side of this discussion.
아직 신에게는 12척의 배가 남아있사옵니다.
The Korean film Myeongnang, or Roaring Currents, was the runaway blockbuster of the summer, shattering box office records. Just what were the economic effects from the film? According to the Bank of Korea, the economic benefits of selling 16 million tickets was similar to the production of about 600,000 smartphones for an estimated economic benefit of about $400 million. It's also the equivalent of producing 20,000 automobiles, which has a job creation effect of 191 people. But in the film industry, that effect is equivalent to more than 1,800 people, about 9.5 times higher. It's clear from the figures that the Korean film industry has the potential for massive growth, especially with major companies leading the way. Major companies have created so-called multiplexes and established infrastructure, including an integrated computer network for ticket sales. As a result, more and more moviegoers are visiting theaters. I prefer going to multiplexes because I can watch movies with my kids, eat, and shop all in one place.
It's less convenient to visit a conventional theater since we need to leave the building to eat and it's harder to park. It's much better to go to multiplexes.
It is much more convenient and cheaper than watching movies in theaters. Multiplexes are also more easily accessible, so I prefer them.
The average Korean watched 4.1 movies in the theater in 2012, which was the world's highest rate, trailing only the United States. Major companies have turned their focus to the country's film industry by building newer, more comfortable theaters and producing more films that are more comparable to those made overseas. Distributors and theaters owned by major companies deny claims that they have an oligopoly on the country's screens. However, most of the films run at theaters owned by major companies such as Lotte Cinema and Megabox were the ones distributed by CJENM.
Normally, industries are based on a pyramid structure. There are various kinds of bases on the bottom and a few companies at the top that take control of the whole industry. A large amount of capital is needed to maintain the film industry, but in reality, only major companies have the ability to raise that type of capital. If we impose regulations on companies simply because they dominate a lot of screens, it would be impossible to improve conditions and impact of the oligopoly of the Korean film industry.
Some people say it would be better to let the market decide the fate of this industry, as blockbusters like Roaring Currents might not be possible in the fate of stricter regulations.
So we were talking about regulating this system or somehow having regulation to protect the Indian art films, but is that going to work out perfectly? I mean, in this free market system, what do you think?
I don't think you can do two things. We're a democracy and we believe in the free market system. So if you start regulating something, it's like lightning in a bottle. You start to tamper with it. I think it could go the wrong way. You have to make really good stuff. If you make good movies, the old saying, if you make something good, people will go and want to buy it or see it. And I think the challenge is for all the filmmakers and producers out there to come up with content that people want to see, which is always hard to do. And I teach filmmaking, and what I see in the younger generations is that this new generation of people that want to be part of this industry. But at the same time, when I ask my students, what do you want to be? The Seoul Institute of the Arts, usually we have filmmakers come out, so it's like directors or cinematographers. And a lot of my students want to work for the conglomerates, ironically. They're like, I want to work in this company and things like that. So even it's affecting the younger generations as they're coming up. But at the same time, I think one of the things as a filmmaker that I found is that, in the past, when the production system was the technology was very expensive. When we were shooting film, you needed to buy very expensive cameras. You couldn't edit at home on a computer, but the digital revolution changed all that. And now you can make movies for really cheap. You can there are movies that were made on a mobile phone,
right?
And have won festivals everywhere, things like that. So from the making standpoint, it's now cheaper and easier to make movies more than ever before. So more content, even though it's harder to show these movies, it's ironically there's a lot more independent movies just exploding. The accessibility of technology to be able to do it, and I think the other hope, and I think I can throw this into discussion today, is the internet. Some filmmakers like Kim Ki-duk has said, if the theater system doesn't work, I'm just going to show my movies on the internet, and hopefully, everybody will get to see it. But that's like kind of a blanket statement, because the one X factor is like, you know, everybody sees it for free. And of course, you know, it didn't, if we all made stuff for free, we can also do that, but you know, movie making is still costly, and you need a production budget. And when you start having stars come out in the movies, you have to pay them, things like that. So, but how do we make it so that people want to see the movies by paying for the content? You know, like for example, in the U.S., a big now movie industry mover is Netflix. You know, and they have, not only are they buying movie content to show on the internet, that people are just like, you know, I'm going to get Netflix, you pay a monthly fee, and then you can download as many movies as you want. And now they're getting into the actual investment of movies and dramas.
So you're not necessarily a big fan of the government stepping in, and I really like the points that you made. So what do you think, Professor Park?
Well, there is no such thing as free market. As I said before, to create a free market, you need a regulation. Almost all free market countries remain free because they have regulations.
Then what kind of regulations?
Well, right now, even in Korea, there's a restriction on large conglomerates from going into broadcasting.
Certain areas.
Yes, from newspapers. Industrial companies cannot own banks. And insurance companies cannot mix their products, life insurance with liability insurance. There are tons of regulations that prohibit companies from doing things to give more freedom of choice to consumers and to other businesses. I think all we need to think about is whether we should apply the same laws, the same logic to the film industry as well. And there is really no logical reason why we should not if the problems abound. And I think that it's not, you know, we are not trying to single out film industry. We are trying to, we just want to see whether we can regulate the film industry the same way that we are regulating all other industries.
So, I mean, but then this vertical integration system that we got going, it does work in some ways, not necessarily for the indie filmmakers and some of the consumers who really want artsy films. It does help to maintain quality. It does help to stabilize profits. So what do you say to that?
I have mixed feelings about that. I think that maybe one of the biggest successes of this vertically integrated system is that it allowed for the creation of these companies that could compete with the Hollywood studios. And back in the 1990s, there was a lot of concern that when Hollywood studios were given the right to directly distribute in Korea, that they would come to dominate the market, as they do in many countries around the world. But in Korea, you have these very strong local companies that can compete with Hollywood. And so that's a good thing. On the other hand, I think that it's really perhaps been taken a step too far with the exhibition. And I think that you can vertically integrate, you know, from investment to production to distribution, but taking it to the level of exhibition is really quite a radical step in some ways. If you compare to most other industries around the world, there are few examples where you have so much concentrated power as in Korea. And if you look at just the pattern of the way that films are released in Korea and compare it to the US, for example, it's virtually unheard of that one film would occupy more than 50 or 60% of the screens in the US. It would get up to 20 or 30% perhaps. And so I think that given the fact that we have reached this point where there is such a lopsided distribution of power, then, I mean, personally, I am open to the idea of a sort of paramount decision for Korea, where, the...
Separating the...
Yeah, I think that certainly the conglomerates don't want that to happen and they'll resist that. But I think that there could be a lot of positive results from a situation like that.
So a lot of ideas tossed around. So what do we do? What other solutions can we talk about? More of the realistic ones? Or what can you do in your capacity? Or what can I do as a moviegoer to sort of change the situation or improve the environment?
Yeah. I think partly it comes down to an issue of film culture. And, on one side, we need these films to be available to the audience, but on the other side, we need an audience who is curious and who is kind of active in seeking out interesting films, and doesn't simply sit back passively and, you know, go to see the film that everybody's talking about. And, you know, Korea, I think, has developed a really, in some ways, a very strong film culture. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about films all throughout society, and there are, you know, film magazines that contain a lot of interesting debate and criticism about film. The government, perhaps, should be to support this development of film culture. And there are things that can be done and that are being done which have found success. And I'd hope that they would push it a little bit further. For example, there's a program where if a theater agrees to focus more on kind of diverse filmmaking, films from around the world, like art house films, then there's a program in which the government provides them a yearly stipend to counteract the fact that they're not going to make as much money as they would if they only screen blockbusters. And so the government has selected a number of screens across the country and supported them financially, and this has allowed, you know, for many, I mean, it's improved the situation to a degree that, you know, without this system, perhaps, you know, a film like yours might have been released in 2 theaters instead of 10. But I think there's a sense now that, you know, this program isn't being supported to the degree that it could be.
Or it could be.
And in the most recent decision about which theaters to support, there were a lot of multiplex theaters that were selected to receive this kind of support. And so that's raised a lot of questions.
I mean, you brought up a good point. We want a more curious audience. But how do you build a curious audience? By showing more diverse films. We want to give them a chance to see Director Seo's movie, Kim Ki-deok's movie, there's other films, and then they'll catch up. We cannot just show Hollywood blockbusters and then, or Korean blockbusters, and then expect the audience to, you know, I don't know, go to some film classes and learn to like, you know, diversity films. So I think that the initiative has to come from the industry, not from the audience.
And speaking of sort of protecting or promoting independent films, you talked about in the beginning movie collage system, but even these systems, the theaters that are supposed to only air independent films, even they're run by large conglomerates. So that the system, are we just not going to be able to break away from?
Well, movie collage is like one thing that CGV does, but there's also the Korean Film Commission has Independent Art Plus system, which is, as Darcy pointed out, they give stipends to certain theaters that will play diverse movies. But the problem with movie collage is the collage division itself imports foreign movies as well, so they need to program all these content that they bought. So again, it's competition with our local filmmakers to try to get the movies in. But again, I want to bring it back to the fact that I think Darcy made a really good point that we need to educate more of the audience, like the people, to get excited about wanting to see the movies. And I think the one way to do it, besides making content, which is controlled by the conglomerates, is actually the internet. You know, you could actually see any movie now on the internet. You can download. Of course, you know, the problem is with illegal downloads, but if we can somehow solve this problem by regulation, you know, and I heard somebody say something like, now if something's so cheap to download, it's too hard to illegally download, so I'll just pay. You know, so we need to sort of encourage people in Korea to, you know, that these content is made with hard work. And you know, people's livelihood is dependent on that. And I think if we can educate the audience to want more of this stuff, I think then the theater distribution side will also have to follow that. But I think by just regulation alone, it might solve it for just the moment. But my fear is that by regulating too much of this system, it could actually dismantle it a little bit and you know, we're always competing with all, you know, it seems like musicals are on the rise. Movies are not just the only content around, you know, everybody's trying to get people back into the theaters. And, you know, I used to run a film festival where it was like digital, it was a digital film festival in Korea. And I remember, I think the height of it was like 2007, sorry. That was like when I think everybody was going to see movies. Movies were a big thing. And now in 2014, you know, when I go to a film festival, I just don't get that passionate, you know, people wanting to see movies. And even with my students, you know, my earlier students that I've been teaching for about 15 years, the kids that I taught in like 1999, they were completely crazy about movies. That's all they wanted to do. But now, you know, mobile technology. So you're competing with all these different things. So I think, again, how do we, my thing is about how do we diversify the content so that we really grab people's imagination and then have them go, I got to see this movie. You know, and I think new formats of entertainments are coming out. But I think the movie industry will go on for a very long time. You know, we thought for a long time that film would exist, celluloid. And now it's in you know, the only country that's making movies with 35mm film is Hollywood, actually. Korea no longer makes them. They're all done digitally. And you know, we just thought the revolution would stay a little, you know, that kind of old technology would stay a long time, but you know, it's really changing so fast.
I think that's a very good takeaway point. Just the different format of entertainment now with the internet and technology. I think not only you know, the distribution system of films and theaters, I think that would be a topic that we could be talking about maybe 5 years from now, maybe. So, okay. And we also had a chance to go out and meet another movie expert, a critic, to hear more about this issue and about the idea of further promoting independent cinema. Let's listen in.
그런 무비 콜라주가 스크린 독과점의 한
As is the case with Movie Collage, which is a theater owned by a major company that is reserved for diverse films, this could be a partial solution, but not the ultimate solution. And it could lead to another type of oligopoly later. So for fair competition, we should make use of other platforms like with screens in subway stations, on mobile phones, or on television. The government should make good use of these platforms to make the industry more diverse. Films should be easily accessible as a type of a product for customers, who are in this case moviegoers.
제품을 소비할 수 있도록 도와줘야 되는 거죠.
영화라는 게 어떤 이야기인지
The number of tickets sold depends on the film's story, its director, and the actors. About 30% of the films produced in Korea each year don't even get a chance to be released in the theater. I think it is a great idea for major companies to build theaters only for smaller films, but not if it's merely a temporary measure to avoid the separation between distribution and screening. For example, Disney invested $8.5 million in Pulp Fiction, and that ended up making $200 million worldwide. If these theaters reserved for small films are boosted with capital and the creative ideas of people from within the industry, it can create a positive synergy effect.
나름대로 긍정적인 시너지 효과가 있을 것이라고 봅니다.
We are going to, I mean, a lot of ideas tossed around. We've had a good run. So I want to ask you for your final thoughts for the closing. Maybe I will start off with you, Professor Park.
I think that one point that we didn't get to, well, I didn't get to respond is whether vertical integration now allows Korea to compete in global film market. What are the films that sell well in overseas market? Are those Myeongyang or these you know, Korean blockbusters made by the top theater chains? No, the names don't come to my mind, but it is the Korean films made by the independents that sell well in the overseas market. I think that if you know, Baeguk is kind of the threshold for the probably it's the threshold that films, Korean films, now routinely go over thanks to the existence of vertical integration.
Right.
But if there are no, you know, Baeguk budget films, Will people just go see Iron Man 3? I don't think so. I think that there will be many other quality movies that will compete for audience's attention.
Okay, and Darcy?
Yeah, I mean, I am concerned a bit about the direction that the film industry is going. I mean, if you compare the situation now with 10 years ago, I think that Korean filmmaking at that time was a bit more adventurous. And I'm concerned that there's a bit too much of a focus on profit making these days, and that these big companies have become very powerful through their theater chains, but they're also the ones that are making the majority of mainstream commercial films in Korea. And their filmmaking feels more formulaic to me than it has in the past, and so I'm concerned about that. And so personally, I think that perhaps a mixture of regulation, of support, like the carrot and the stick. But also, I do want to encourage ordinary people also to get involved, because I think that it could be something as simple as finding an interesting independent film that's screening in theaters that people don't really know very much about, and then going on Twitter and then talking about it.
Well, I agree with my guests, my co-guests here, both of them. I think they raised really good points. I may diverge a little bit in my final thoughts here, but I think I'm also in agreement that I think too much regulation, we need regulation maybe in the exhibition side of the movie industry in Korea, but I also fear that if we regulate it too much, it could actually decrease the growth of the industry. And as a filmmaker that is concerned about not just making Korean movies, but making movies that are attractive to international audiences, I think we as filmmakers also have to think about, as Professor Park raised the issue, is a blockbuster movie that succeeded in Korea, is that translatable in Hollywood or other film markets? I think more filmmakers should try to make more universal type of movies that could sort of translate in another country. And for example, Hollywood makes movies about Korea, and right now, we had the Avengers movie shoot in Korea, and I just heard the mayor of Seoul's, announced that Star Trek, the next movie, is going to be shot here as well. So Korea is a hot topic within Hollywood itself, and it's a recent, phenomenon. I think the Korean wave slowly having moved over there. So is this a really good opportunity for our filmmakers to try to shine internationally by making content that, that might be attractive to Western audiences, surely to audiences in China and also in Asia, so we have to sort of not just rely on our domestic industry, but try to sort of expand outside of our own region.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience and your great ideas today. Thank you. It's not easy to see clear solutions in discussions like this, but I think it's important and necessary to keep the conversation going, at least for growth of this industry itself and to keep moviegoers happy. And that will do it for this week's Upfront. Remember, you're always welcome to get in touch with us. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.